Ayan na. Kamusta kayo dyan, mga kameta? Yan, energy level. medyo spend force na tayo. Kaya umaga naman, umabol na naman tayo sa ibang events. I'm sure that some of you caught a glimpse of yung mga pinagagawa natin kanina. Medyo 1 hour late nag-start yung speech natin. Of course, ito yung Philippines National Public Relations PR Congress, no? So kasama po natin kanina mga leading publicists, leading journalists, leading PR companies, mga gano'n. At of course, ako naman, ang pinag-usapan ko yung yung vlogger life na charot. Hindi, ang pinag-usapan natin mga kameta is yung sarili natin mga analysis dun sa West Philippines when it comes to crisis management, no? Crisis management, communications for crisis management, no? So in particular, tinignan natin how not to do crisis management in the context of very sensitive geopolitical crisis, let's say like yung nangyari sa Ayungin Shoal, whether nangyari sa arbitration award natin in 2016 or whether nangyari ito sa atin Recto Bank, Reed Bank. In fairness, as I always try to do, I ended up on a pretty positive note because I'm very happy with how things are turning out under the leadership of people like Commodore J. Tariela in the Philippine Coast Guard. You have fantastic folks like National Security Advisor, spokesman, USEC, Jonathan Malaya. So we have many of this kind of very, very interesting cases. And in fairness, I think there are also a number of people in Malacanang who are also doing their job. I think mga professional journalists who are focused on making sure that there's a proper coordination of messaging when it comes to the Ayungin Shoal, the West Philippine Sea. So, kinontrast ko yan dun sa situation natin pa noon ni si Barangay Chairman, President, Mayor Digong when, iba yung sinasabi ng presidente, iba yung sinasabi ng DFA, iba yung sinasabi ng DND secretary, hindi pwede yan, di ba? Medyo interesting lang yan pag mga first few months, meron kang element of surprise, element of ambiguity or strategic ambiguity, pero pag 6 years kang medyo malabo, medyo mawawala ng respeto ng mga ibang bansa sa'yo. So I analyze elements of what I think are essential to effective crisis management when it comes to communication. So just before making the PowerPoint kanina umaga, I was just naisip ko yung care, no? Consistency, accelerated messaging, kasi minsan the developments are very fast, so you cannot wait until next day kasi by that time yung mga bloggers, fake news peddlers, alam nyo na yan, yung mga yan yung mga think tank, overnight think tank experts yan, wala na poison nila yung diskurso. And of course, there should be still a sense of responsibility sa mga crisis period. Of course, mahal natin ang bayan natin, mahal natin ang West Philippine Sea, mahal natin yung mga ating mga mangingisda. At the same time, you make sure na you don't totally humiliate your enemy or you don't totally engage in jingoistic, sensationalist rhetoric. No? And thankfully, we don't have that kind of situation. And lastly, of course, is exposure. Kailangan natin expose yung mga vectors of disinformation, misinformation, especially if we see a pattern, especially we see some sort of fishy stuff going on. And in certain cases, you follow the money trail. And that's where influence operations comes in. That's where updating our espionage law comes in. All of those things that we have been talking about with our guests, and I've been saying in my own platforms over the past 2 months or so, no? Now, balikan natin itong issue na to kasi I think there's a lot going on here. Because the more you look at it, itong issue ng confidential fund, the more na nagkakaroon siya ng mga derivative, political and legal and even psychological implications and even electoral, I would say, at some point. No? Now, kanina nakita natin, pinost natin yung video na yan, yung video ni Senator RISA HONTIVEROS where she made it absolutely clear na hindi niya kailangan ng respeto ng ibang tao because clearly she's getting respect from respectable people. But it's a question of respecting institutional checks and balances, respecting basic rules on accountability and transparency in any modern democracy. Now, ibang usapan kung Yung tingin ng iba, nasa medieval times tayo. Kaya nga sabi ko, yung Philippines, yung, yung Pilipinas, may aspeto tayo ng tinatawag ko na feudal democracy. Kasi yung demokrasya natin, minsan parang ang trato sa mga voters, parang serfs lang. Tapos yung mga trapos, mga dynasties, they act as if sila yung mga hacienderos back in the day of mga Espanyols, yung mga encomienda style. If not, yung mga parang medieval time aristocrats who were just lording it over, mostly farmers or, yung mga ganyan situation, right? So may pagkaganyan talaga yung politika natin. And especially as you get more and more outside the major urban centers of the country, you get outside the major industrialized zones, you see na yung ibang mga mayor lang siguro, or barangay chairman pa lang, they act as if sila yung hari. No? So, yung sense of entitlement, yung sense of feeling special, yung sense na kailangan mo ng sariling batalyon to show strength, etc. Unfortunately, it's something that we see a lot across the country. So, I'm not talking about a particular person here and there. So, ang argumento ni RISA HONTIVEROS here is that pag pinag-usapan ng issue ng fiscalizing, checks and balances, pag pinag-usapan yung trabaho ng Senado, hindi po ito about miscongeniality. Hindi po ito yung gusto mo ako, ayaw kita, personalan. Hindi ito ganyan. This is a serious game, right? This is a serious affair. This is a matter of national, you know, this is a matter of integrity of state institutions. This is a matter of rules of the road, no? Now, again, there's so many things going on here. Now, I'm not here to, you can already see what's the implication of what we're saying here. But ako kasi, instead of coming in and bash one side and take the other side, I want to always explain yung bigger context, no? Now, kakasabi ko lang, pag tinignan mo yung Pilipinas, meron talaga tayong aspeto ng feudal na demokrasya. Demokrasya because at least on surface we have shallow trappings of a modern democracy. Regular elections, some elections more competitive than the others. Meron kang aspect ng media coverage, scrutiny, etc. So, meron pa rin tayong aspeto ng modern democracy, except it's more a facade than reality. Because if you look at the political economy, distribution of power, etc., mas para tayong mga pidal na bansa. No? At, alam mo, mas napansin ko yan nung nandun tayo sa Taiwan over the weekend. Kasi sabi ko nga, ang nakakapag-hinayan dito is, yung Taiwan po ay nag-transition to democracy few years after we returned to democracy in 1986. So, in Taiwan, you can argue that really the transition towards democracy was somewhere between 1988 to 1992. And some would even argue all the way to 1996. So, sobrang batang-bata pa kanilang demokrasya. And yet, tignan mo yung kalidad ng kanilang democracy. Tignan mo yung kalidad ng mga kanilang leaders. Tignan mo yung kalidad ng kanilang kampanya. Tignan mo yung kalidad ng kanilang mga kandidato. Tignan mo yung kalidad ng kanilang mga voters, how what they demand from their leaders. O yan, minsan may suntukan din dun sa kanilang parliament sa Taiwan because people are very passionate ideologically, about policies, about the future of the country. But gets nyo, diba? Gets nyo. There's definitely a modern democracy aspect to it. At katulad dun sa ating article for the Philippine Daily Inquirer, column natin this week, if you look at it, my indicators, the Economist Intelligence Unit, Freedom House, I can go on and on. All of them show that Taiwan is one of the most advanced democracies on earth and arguably the most advanced democracy in entire Asia. No? So, if you look at all sorts of different indicators, it's not a perfect country. It has its own serious problems, of course, threat of war, etc. But, ang layo na nila sa atin. And wala pang isang oras nandito ka na sa Pilipinas kung nag-flight ka. So, mas lalo nag-sink in sa akin itong pagka-feudal ng ating political system. Now, going back to this, pag-usapan natin ang what looks like the most trenchant and some would say most resonant issue in the past few weeks or so. And this issue could snowball over time. We don't know. Now, obviously, people want to talk about other issues katulad ng presyo ng bigas, no? At siguro kailangan natin ng isang separate na vlog on that or explainer for that matter because in principle, hindi ako against, no? dun sa subsidies. Kasi yung paggamit ng targeted subsidies, especially dun sa mga basic commodities katulad ng gasolina, katulad ng bigas or you know, or bread in certain countries, ginagawa ng maraming bansa yan para protektahan yung mga mas vulnerable na sectors. Now, it has to be targeted, it has to be limited because otherwise subsidies create distortions, market distortions, no? So in principle, hindi ako necessarily against it, but of course may mga caveats diyan. So for me, dapat pag-usapan natin itong issue ng ng bigas, presyo ng bigas, and now the Philippines becoming the biggest importer of rice in the world again, overtaking China and even United States. That means nakakabala yung situation. In fact, right now, pinag-uusapan na rin kung kailangan na talaga natin ng isang full-fledged Department of Agriculture Secretary. And pinag-uusapan na ngayon kung kailangan na siguro isang tao katulad ni NEDA Secretary Balisacan na may PhD in agricultural economics. Baka kailangan talaga natin isang tao na may alam talaga sa usapin agrikultura, sa usapin food security, or at the very least, i-elevate mo yung mga USEC dyan na napakagaling, including yung isang USEC dyan sa DA, Department of Agriculture, na dating professor yata sa Cornell University. Tinignan ko yung Google Scholar niya, like, amazing, super smart guy. But of course, may politika din dyan eh. Hindi naman pwede na matalino ka lang or academic ka lang na magaling. Dapat talaga meron kang gravitas, meron kang political capital, meron kang backing from the president kasi marami kang babanggain dyan eh. Kung gawin mo ng tama yung trabaho mo at dapat handa ka, no, for possible consequences if God forbid, 'di ba? Even if you're a government official, 'di ba? So, yeah, I think we need a separate explainer on that, and siguro I'll try to find someone also, some economist friends on ours para we can have a back and forth conversation on this. Now, balikan natin itong issue ng confidential fund and itong back and forth between RISA, HONTIVEROS, and SARA. Let me first go to what's really happening here, no? So let's show both sides of the coin para naman fair tayo, di ba? Now, on one hand, obviously, you know, things really got started when the Commission on Audit, di ba, came out with all sorts of different analysis that showed parang, what's going on here? No. Now, obviously, what really caught the attention of many people was bakit ang taas ng numbers ng mga escorts? Bakit 433? At katulad ng pinag-usapan natin earlier doon sa isang meta natin, that represents more than 400%, in fact, close to 500% increase in the number of escorts compared to the previous vice president. So I think si Lenny had around 70 or something like that. So we're not saying the number 2 in the country who could potentially replace the president in some unfortunate crazy situation. We're not saying na dapat wala siyang escort. Pero ang tanong is 430T. But actually, even more interesting is this report on the so-called splitting. And this has actually raised even more questions like what's going on here. So ito po yung reporting medyo mahalaga. Kasi some are arguing, medyo bawal yan. Well, I mean, to put it mildly, dapat bawal yung sinisplit mo, yung already may allotment, tapos isi-subsplit mo, tapos ganyan. Medyo bawal daw yan nang sinasabi ng critics. Or, well, you can check the law yourself and you'll realize, you know, where they're coming from, right? Let's just read it para lang makita niyo saan tayo galing. So, the COA flagged procurement transactions of the DepEd regional offices and schools divisions offices SDOs totaling 400.94 million pesos, deeming them contrary to the implementing rules and regulations IR of the Philippines procurement law. So, procurement law yung basihan dito. According to the COA, splitting of government contracts is, quote, not allowed. Define, post ko dito para basahin niyo mismo. So, hindi tayo nag-invento dito. Klarong-klaro dito yung issue, diba? Or at least yung issue sa mga kritiko, diba? Ito, diba? So, ito po yung issue. So, pwede nyo basahin yourself. So, ito yung issue nila sa splitting, no? So, according to the COA, splitting of government contracts is, quote, not allowed because, and they define splitting contracts as, quote, the division or breaking up of contracts into smaller quantities and amounts or dividing contract implementation into artificial phases or subcontracts potentially for the purpose of evading or circumventing the requirements of the law and implementing rules and regulations, yung so-called IRR, no? Government auditors noted the office did not comply with the minimum technical specification procuring tablets for students in the fourth. So, andun yan. Please read it on yourself. You can just, copy paste yung title and then and all the details are there. May breakdown talaga yan, right? So some were saying that this is a serious transgression. No, so in short, procurement law yung tinitignan ng iba at sinasabi na parang medyo what's going on there. So that's where some of these critics are coming from. Of course, you have Congresswoman Castro representing the teachers and the education community, also very strong there. But in the Senate, on the national level, you have really RISA HONTIVEROS, really taking up the cudgels here, no? Pagdating dun sa ano bang kailangan talaga natin gawin dito. I'm just trying to find the... Okay. Now, so those are just some of the issues, guys. Now, remember, yung COA, it's supposed to be a kind of a above the fray constitutional body. Dapat potentially even may power siya to file charges or recommend charges, etc. Yet, and this is where things get interesting because there are two levels to this. On one hand, you have multiple cabinet members, including a former justice who ruled on DAP issues, coming out and supporting the vice president and saying completely legit ang nangyayari dito. No? So the Malacanang really stood strongly by vice president. Obviously, I'm talking about the so-called little president, Bersamin, right? Just have to bring it out. Again, we're just. So Bersamin was the first one. I'll bring it out. But hindi lang siya nag-iisa. Recently, we also had the defense secretary also coming out and defending the vice president's confidential fund or intelligence fund because ang argument niya is, well, may mga infiltration or potential manipulation of the youth na nangyari. So yes, DepEd kind of needs that. Well, what was perhaps conveniently not said by our great secretary is that kamusta naman ang budget ng mga actual security agencies who have an actual job to deal with security issues. Kaya nga nandun sila, 'di ba? Kaya nga kaya nga nag-allocate tayo ng pera sa NICA, sa AFP, sa kapulisan, 'di ba? Ano ba ang trabaho nila? Exactly, to make sure na protektado yung ating mga kabataan, mga tao, etc. But, well, this is no less than your defense secretary who, by the way, is just not anyone. He's considered as one of the greatest legal minds in contemporary Philippine history, right? Bar top-notcher, super smart guy. I ask a lot of people who know a thing or two about really smart legal minds, and practically all of them will say, Gibo Chodor is really, really smart guy. So when he says something like that, it has gravitas, right? You may not agree with him, but there's a gravitas to it. Now, more recently, more like today also, you saw another top secretary, now Department Budget Management Secretary also coming out and arguing that there was no violation whatsoever because technically speaking, wala naman reallocations na nangyari dito to violate yung mga batas at saka yung Supreme Court rulings on the Disbursement Acceleration Program nung panahon ni Pinoy, no? So sabi niya, while it is understandable that at the outset the release of funds to the OVP may be perceived as a transfer, the same was not technically so. For such release was funded from contingent fund under the fiscal year 2022 General Appropriations Act and not from the budget of the president, of the office of the president. So now there's also this kind of a very kind of nuanced, technical, legalist argument na hindi naman siya talagang transfer, so technically it's so that's my point. When you have so many people coming out there, Department of National Defense Secretary, very top-notch lawyer itself, you have Department of Budget Management, you have a former justice, Chief Justice even, right, for that matter, in the Malacanang also support. And then, you also have, and this is I think even more important than all of the things that I mentioned, the Ombudsman Office, right? Because if there is concern doon sa paggamit ng pondo ng bayan, kaban ng bayan, dapat lagot ka sa Ombudsman Office. But interestingly, the Ombudsman Office also is now pushing back against dito sa ginagawa ng COA, saying that it wants COA's memos out of public eye. Kasi ang argument nila dito is napopoliticize or something like that, no? Na we have to make sure na, objective reports, etc. Na. So ang ayan naman tayo. Siguro kung medyo mas maaga, mas masasabi kong gusto kong sabihin. Kaso like, okay. 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 Mahal natin ng Pilipinas. Para sa bayan. Para sa bayan to. Okay. Woo! Napapawisan na ako Bakit kaya? Mahirap maging mabait talaga, no? So, ang point ko naman dito is, eto na, my former, I laid it all out for you guys. Bakit tayo nagtataka na yung iba hindi natutuwa na kine-question sila if there's so many people out there who are going the extra mile to defend you? And these are not just anybody. There's secretaries, cabinet secretaries, there's, you know what I'm saying? Right? So, hindi natin alam mo na sasabihin ko, di ba? Ako naman, of course, ewan ko kay tatay, but sa isang demokrasya, you're innocent until proven guilty. So for me, there should be a due process. If there's any kind of anomalies, then dapat it has to be determined through proper channels. Diba? Yung discussion namin with Attorney Libayan all on the Tulfos and all of that. Well, you can say a lot of things about Tulfos, but they never endorse EJK or things like that, which some other people who should have known better and my legal training kind of did, right? Tingnan natin where's the ICC gonna go. But anyway, going back to this, so let's not jump into conclusions in a sense because, we believe in due process. Ang concern lang ng iba dyan is, will due process be even allowed to take its course? Right? But, biglang, hindi na nandyan pumunta yung usapan kasi, again, as I said, ideally, in principle, the COA should be able to be in a position to not only recommend, but even file charges if it's necessary, right? But, we know, this is the Philippines, this is not Sweden, right? And you have a situation whereby the Ombudsman Office is stepping in, kind of saying, well, wait, you guys, wag niyo yan, baka mapolit yan. So, di ba? Saan na tayo mapunta dyan? So, kaya ang usapan ngayon is, paano natin sabihin? Sige, magkape muna ako. I hope you guys understand what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to be as fair and sane and sensible as possible. At the same time kasi may standards tayo sa buhay, di ba? Pagdating sa, alam niyo na anong klaseng demokrasya ang kailangan natin. But going back to this, again, of course, innocent until presumed, I'm presumed innocent until proven guilty. So, we should not jump into conclusion and say something's wrong. What I think some people are finding quite problematic, at least at this point, is that parang efforts to ensure transparency and accountability are being besmirched, no? And you had a lot of this back and forth between Senator RISA HONTIVEROS and Vice President SARA Duterte over the past few days, because I think one camp is essentially implying that pinopolitika etong so this is the timeline, you can check it yourself. There's this fantastic article on the timeline of this, back and forth between these two very strong women, right? So one camp is saying, pinopolitical nyo lang yan, ayaw nyo lang sa akin, kaya kung ano nang ginagawa nyo, are you using this standard procedures to kind of, put us in a negative light, etc. And I think the argument also of the OVP and the Deputy Secretary is that you should give us time, you should give us flexibility, you should give us the space, the policy space, dahil malalim yung problema sa atin pagdating sa edukasyon, because it's not only the education system which is problematic, but also yung seguridad, no? ng mga tao, no, yung mga kabataan dahil nga dito sa mga I don't know, mga NPA, mga ganyan. So, yun yung line of argument nila. Yung kabila naman, sinasabi ni RISA HONTIVEROS dito is, wait lang, huwag tayong magulo. Let's look at the basics here. Wait lang, maayos. Are we respecting the procurement laws? Wait lang, itong nakikita natin sa COA, medyo kakaiba. Ano nangyari dyan? Can you please at least clarify to us? Bother to clarify to us what's going on there. Because as much as there should be a level of discretion, there should be a certain degree of prerogative given to high-level officials who have national security-related portfolio, or in the case of DepEd, suddenly my national security the portfolio, then you just, you shouldn't take it personally. Na hindi ito yung usapin na I like you, you don't like me, I respect you. Indeed, this is not a personal issue. We're not politicizing it. We're just reminding everyone and we're just doing our job when it comes to ensuring may checks and balances tayo. Kasi yun nga yung trabaho ng legislature. Now, obviously, the other side will say, kaya nga may parliamentary courtesy. Remember yung nangyari dun naman dun sa committee ni Sandro, etc. So, this is, baala na kayo humusga, but this is how I see this issue turning out. But, let me tell you one thing. Obviously, there's a potential for this to snowball. Itong issue ng confidential fund. If there's no, I would say, concerted effort to create more clarity about things. Kasi nga, when there's no clarity and there's mystery, that's where Marites comes in, that's where political propaganda, distortion, etc. Kaya nga siguro it would be nice if the OVP provides more details para lang ma-shut down yung mga any malicious kind of interpretation, etc. No? And siguro it's also good na ipakita na this is about, this is about the process, diba? Na hindi naman personal, etc. So I think that would be good because we're talking about the second highest office, elected office of the land, right? Now, nevertheless, I think there should not be any and this is where things get interesting, no? Let's go even mas big picture. The thing is, I remember very well, no, nung well, exactly 10 years ago, 'di ba? 2013 ba 'yan? 'Di ba? Nung sa PDAF, 'di ba? Grabe yung reaction ng tao. Grabe yung galit ng tao. Ang dami nag-rally doon sa Luneta ba yan? I have pictures, etc. Pumunta ako doon sa rally sa Luneta. Back in 2013 now, almost exactly 10 years ago, even a whiff of corruption, well, in the case of PDAF, it was way more than that, created huge public reaction and anger, etc. Now, pansin nyo, we're not saying anything of that sort on the ground. Wala tayong nakikitang rallies, protests, whatever. There's a lot of negative commentaries online. There's a lot of sympathy for those who are taking up the cudgels. But I'm not seeing anywhere close to what we saw 10 years ago. And there could be many explanations for that. First and foremost, of course, the camp of the OVP and the Office of will say, well, they're not the same because this is just about confidential. It's just more a question of transparency, while yung PDAF was something else. That's one argument. But I think the other argument is also, of course, you have a popular vice president. You have a vice president who got the highest number of votes of any vice president, or in fact, any official, right? 32 million votes yata nakuha niya, di ba? And I don't think that popularity has vanished. And the other problem also we have here is that meron tayong mga information, well, sabi ni Christian is information tribes. For me, I would say information cults, right? Because ang problema natin sa Pilipinas is, since bumaba both yung kalidad at saka yung kumpiyansa ng tao sa mainstream media dun sa traditional gatekeepers, when a controversy comes out, hindi ka pupunta sa media or hindi ka pupunta sa so-called neutral, I don't know, commentariat to derive your opinion on the issue. What you do is you go to the bloggers or you go to the quote-unquote journalists or quote-unquote influencers, thought leaders who make you hear what you want to hear, right? So ako, I'm not very optimistic na in the short to medium run, right? Assuming talaga there's really something here, and our critics would say there is, that there will be any kind of serious political backlash, right? But remember, 2028 is really the time horizon, no? And if these things snowball, imagine every year magiging issue itong confidential fund or something like that, or magsusnowball yan, then that could create some sort of political friction and obstacles, right? But for now, I'm not very, because sa aking palagay, concerns about allocations of funds, procurement, etc. It's not as intense as it used to be before. And at the same time, you have a very popular vice president here, at least based on the numbers we see. Now, will that stand forever? At the 20, ibang usapan yan. But this brings me to the other issue, which is quite interesting. Remember, for the past year or so, constantly ang argument ko dito is nasaan yung opposition, and more importantly, nasaan yung leader ng opposition, right? And from what we see here is RISA Hontiveros has more or less cemented her position as the opposition leader, right? It took some time, but I think she's already getting there. I see that in the level of confidence she has when she discusses quite tricky issues. I even ask her questions about, okay, anong gagawin natin ngayon? I mean, or like, where is the opposition going to be, for instance, when they share more in common with Marcos Jr., let's say, on foreign policy issues than with, the previous administration people, right? So and nung tinanong sa kanya ni mga kakulangan ng mga opposition, liberal, progressive, she's very open, she's very self-aware, etc. So very, very impressive. But more than that, it's the gravitas, it's the defiance, it's the determination, it's the indomitable spirits, it's the unwillingness to be intimidated, etc. That's something that is interesting. So this is not to underestimate what RISA was already, Senator RISA Hontiveros was bringing to the table in her previous stints in office. But I think super level up talaga siya over the past 6, 7, 8 months or so. In a sense that I think she's far closer now to that August position of being the opposition leader than, let's say, last year or so. I think especially in the past 3 or 4 months, she really stepped up to the challenge. So on one hand, I see SARA Duterte still remaining quite popular, quite strong, quite defined in her own way. I don't have any illusions that there will be a kind of a massive turn of shift in opinion, etc. And one big factor I would say is also because of the information ecosystems and tribes that we have. Because ang mangyayari dito is, di-defense natin dyan kasi alam natin pinapolitika lang ng mga quote-unquote dilawan yan, di ba? And because you have RISA and Congresswoman Castro, alam mo na, ano sasabihin nila, ay kasi ano lang mga tong dalawa na to, ganyan, di ba? Considering both of these legislators are from progressive backgrounds, no? But at the same time, I think RISA Hontiveros is coming out way stronger out of this. I think she's coming out as really not only the de facto leader, but the embodiment of the leadership that the opposition in the Philippines needs. And it's and I see it at multiple levels. Like intellectually, she's even far more sophisticated than I expected to be. I mean, again, this is not to underestimate her. I knew that she was always a very elegant thinker. But I think naglalong next level. Kumbaga, I don't know. Hindi naman kaya marunong sa football. I was thinking like, I don't know, from Neymar nag Messi or whatever. If I could come from Neymar nag Ronaldo or whatever. No. So my sense here is that for people in the opposition, they have to be realistic about whether this will create a major political shock. If I were to bet, I would say no. No, in the meantime. But down the road, who knows, right? Depending how this is going to be managed. But I think folks in the opposition can take some consolation from the fact, or more than a consolation, that they finally have their leader, right? They finally have their leader. It's a matter of just openly recognizing it for a lot of people. And I think in fairness to Leni Robredo, she has quietly moved into more the social activism world, and that has provided this kind of space for RISA Hontiveros to really show the mettle of her leadership and her willingness to push the envelope, even when faced with very, very formidable political figures and political forces in the country. All right, again, right? Let's be very clear. Innocent until proven otherwise, right? So it's unfair for us to jump into conclusions. At the same time, it would be also nice if there's greater clarity and greater openness to transparency. And lastly, of course, katulad ng sinabi natin kanina, dapat hindi pinipersonal itong mga issue ng institutional checks and balances. But sadly, we are in a political system which is highly polarized. You have information cults and tribes, so things are absorbed differently. But nevertheless, I can see SARA still remaining popular and strong. But at the same time, RISA is also gaining strength and momentum. And I think these two women are going to be quite a dominant force in Philippine politics for the foreseeable future. So you can guess what I'm already implying here, right? 2028, RISA HONTIVEROS versus SARA DUTERETE. It's not looking totally impossible. Maybe that's gonna be the battle for us to watch out. Okay? Alright. Interesting times in the country. Maraming salamat again for everyone who has watched out. Marami naman nanood. So I very much appreciate. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much sa lahat ng mga sumuporta sa atin. Ang dami mga comments. Let me... Oh yan, si Steven Santillan. Medyo skeptical siya, pessimistic. But thank you very much, sir, for sharing your opinion. Si Palik Amore, sabi na dapat siguro hindi naman pinipersonal yan. That's my point yung parang respect. Aruta JV, well, sobrang tinas po kasi ni VP Lenny ang standard ng OVP kahit sobrang inipit ang budget. Well, remember that thing Lenny said about kahit wala kaming budget, marami pa rin kami nagawa, di ba? So well, that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And in fairness, during pandemic, we saw that true. Salamat kay Noemi Tablado, of course, kay Norjelin Dalmasio, Tessie Gomez, Don Miguel Jr., Archie Jokson, Riza Traversin. Yes, marami nagmamahal sa atin. Ang dami nag-comment dito. Kala ko tulog na kayo. 10 p.m. na. Ginbert Brucalas. Ayan, so proud daw siya kay Riza HONTIVEROS. Ayan, si Riz Ani, sabi niya, classy pa din kay Barda Mode. Di ba? Mana sa akin. Ayan na naman tayo. Thank you very much, guys, and talk to you soon. Tuloy lang natin ito. Alright? Please, again, don't worry, I'll post all the links sa lahat ng mga articles na minention natin. Again, we're just reading from the information available out there, right? We're not coming out with whatever. It's already out there. Binasa lang natin, including dun sa procurement law. You can just check it out on yourself. Further details. But I think the important elements, nilatag na natin dyan. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, and God bless.